Dominic Frisby, welcome to So Money.
Thank you very much, Farnoosh. Thank you for having me.
I'm fascinated by your book, and I have to say, this podcast, I think especially right now with so much uncertainty in the stock market and in the world, at times like these, and I'm sure you know well, people like to turn to what we call kind of these like safe havens or sure
hmm
bets. And gold as a commodity, as an investment has, and this is coming from my personal finance reporting life. It's always been seen as kind of this alternative investment, but one to own in especially in these sorts of times. And I know your book doesn't really cover as much the kind of like the how to invest in gold, but more the history and story of gold, which I think is so fascinating. I've never really dug into it. What is it about gold and this asset, this precious metal, that made you want to dedicate a whole book to it?
I've always liked gold, holding it, wearing it, looking at it. And I didn't always have that much, but I remember my mum had some when I was a little boy, some gold jewelry. And just to go back to a couple of your earlier points, I do, that interest in gold has risen, because of its safe haven status.
Right.
The way I always look at gold is one of its many qualities is that it never changes. It doesn't react, it doesn't tarnish, it doesn't rust, it doesn't corrode, and it never loses its shine. I always find that amazing. You can dig up gold that's 5,000 years old and it'll still be shining just as it was 5,000 years ago. And so by buying gold, investing in gold, you're not so much, there are some people that say, buy gold, the US dollar is going to collapse, hyperinflation, blah, blah, blah. And, you buy gold, you'll be a millionaire tomorrow because the system will collapse and you'll be able to just go and buy everything with your gold. That's not really a scenario that I buy so much. But when you invest in gold, you're not so much going to make a huge amount of money as you're protecting what you already have. And so what you already have, you stick it, you hold it as gold, and it's just not going to change. And so the gold price, if you go back to say 2000, you'll see that the gold price I think it's beaten the S&P since 2000, although that's a slightly illusory figure because the S&P was at quite a high price in 2000 and gold was at a low price. But if you take a long-term view, gold tends to, there'll be periods when it outperforms the stock market and there'll be periods where the stock market outperforms gold. But over a 10 or a 20 or a 30 or a 50-year period, the gold will preserve its value. You could say you could buy the S&P 50 years ago, but if you actually bought the companies within the S&P, a lot of those companies that were there 50 years ago just aren't there now. And so even though the S&P or the stock market might preserve its value, the actually companies within it, they come and go. Some of them go bust, some of them get bought out. They all have different fortunes. The gold never, ever changes. And so I see gold as a way of protecting what you already have. Now, obviously, at the moment, you look at money supply growth around the world and it's roughly 7%. So that means 7% more dollars or 7% more euros or 7% more pounds, whatever it is, are being created every year. So you're losing 7% every year to money supply increase. That you used to say once upon a time you're losing that to inflation, but then they use different ways of measuring inflation now. So if you use the word inflation, it's confusing. And I think official inflation is at 3-4%, but money supply is 7%. And so if they increase the money supply by 7%, the value of your money just went down by that equivalent. You can't do that with gold. Yes, gold, there's new mining supply in gold, and new mine supply is 2 to 3% a year of the total amount. But actually, new mine supply and population growth are almost identical, and they have been since forever. Quite incredible fact. There's as much gold per capita now as there was 100 years ago or 200 years ago or 500 years ago. There's slightly more per capita now because of the gold rushes in the late 19th century. But on the whole, the amount of gold per capita stays unchanged. And so that's another reason. It's just protecting what you already have. And so you said, I don't talk that much about how to invest in gold. I do actually on my Substack. But in the book, I figured there's going to be a lot of people who buy the book who already invest in gold and they bought the book because they like gold. So I didn't spend too much time on that. And then the publisher was like, you got to get it below 70,000 words. So I put that chapter in my Substack rather than in the book itself. But yeah, so that's why I like gold. And so I suppose my final answer to your question, you said, why did I write the book and why do I like gold? I like the fact that it never changes. But it's this relationship between truth and honesty. And there's something very truth and beauty. And there's something very pure, and obviously gold is beautiful, but there's also something very truthful about gold. And so one example of this is there are three functions to money. One is to be a medium of exchange, we all know about. You go in the shop and you give your money and you get something in exchange. The other purpose of money is to be a store of wealth, to keep what you already have. In that respect, the dollar or the pound or the euro, whatever, they're not very good stores of wealth because they lose 7% every year to money supply growth. And if you look at what you could buy with the US dollar now compared to 20 years ago, compared to 10 years ago, compared to 50 years ago, the dollar keeps losing its purchasing power. So the pound has been twice as bad as the dollar, by the way. But gold, so now we use the dollar and the pound or the euro, whatever, as our unit of account because we have to declare taxes in that money. And so that's what we account in. But actually, the unit of account is changing. And you get a much better unit of account that doesn't change. So, and gold is unchanged. The gold that you hold in your hand now has been there since before the solar system was formed, and it is unchanged. So gold makes for a much better unit of account. And if you measure the stock market in gold or wages in gold or house prices in gold, you get a very different story to that if you measure it in dollars and so on. So there's a truth to that story that there isn't with pounds and dollars and so on. And so it's that truth has drawn me to gold.
Historically, you talk about in the book how gold is the ultimate human motivator when you look at various empires that were built and destroyed. I'm wondering today, how do you see gold's role as a motivator, if it is a motivator?
Well, the reason it's been such a motivator of human action is that it is wealth in its most distilled form. And people have always done things to get wealth. That is what drives us. And human beings are pretty much the same creatures we were 50,000 years ago. We're probably a bit physically less capable than we were 50,000 years ago because the weak ones would have been weeded out in the cutthroat environment of the Stone Age in a way that they don't get weeded out now. But to all intents and purposes, we had the same instincts, the same need to eat, to put a roof over our house, to protect our family, to reproduce, all these basic human instincts. And after, maybe reproducing and eating and safety, running away when you see a snake or a dangerous animal or whatever. Wealth is what drives human beings to do things,
Right.
to accumulate wealth, to grow the wealth that they have, and to better their lot and the lot of their descendants. And so human beings will, they'll explore new places they've never been before if they think there's money to be made. Now we've got human beings going to space. Why would you want to go to space? Well, we're interested, we'll learn, but we can transform our fortunes. The reason human beings first went to the Americas was, whether it was the Vikings or the Basques or, some people even say the Romans got as far as America. I don't really know. But the reason human beings explored new frontiers was partly to learn, but also to make money and grow their lot. It was always merchants were always the first explorers, and merchants and explorers, the words were almost interchangeable at one point. Why did everyone go to California in 1849? They didn't go for the weather. They went for the gold. And why did all the Spaniards and the Portuguese all go to South America? They all went, for the gold. And why did Jason leave Greece and go off in search of the golden fleece? For wealth, for power, gold.
Yeah.
He who makes the gold makes the rules. Why did Alexander the Great do all the things he did? For money, for power, gold. Everywhere Alexander conquered, there was a gold mine. He just followed where all the gold supply was. And, why do you do this podcast? You do it partly for creative satisfaction, I'm sure, and partly because you like meeting people and talking to people and hearing all these ideas and so on. But you also do it to make money and better your lot, and which is perfectly right and natural. And sometimes in some circles, the desire to make money is seen as a bad thing, but it's a natural human instinct. And gold is the purest form of money that there is. And so for that reason, I say it has driven human action, probably like no other substance on earth, except maybe water.
Yeah. It's funny. I think of my mother. My parents are Iranian.
Okay.
And gold in the Middle East, it transfers from generation to generation. My parents brought it here from Iran, and every time my grandparents would visit, they would bring some sort of gold jewelry. So my mother at this point has accumulated all of this gold, and she keeps it in a safety deposit box, a lock box in the bank. And she called me the other day and she says, the price of gold is going up. What should I do with my with all my jewelry? There seems to be an unwillingness to part with it. And I think there's something there, and the psychology of our relationship to gold, right? Even though we may see it, trading it in for money has for some people is very difficult. They love to hold on to it. For what though? I asked her. What is it? You haven't even looked at this gold in years. It's been in a metal box at the bank down the street. Imagine instead you had money. Well, did you in your work, in your research, did you come across some of these sorts of relationships, these like conflicting relationships people have with their gold, parting with it, not parting with it, inheriting it and passing it on to the next generation? It has a power over them in a way.
Well, it does. It definitely holds a power over you. And there's a famous picture of Vladimir Putin inspecting Russian gold supplies, and he's holding up this gold bar, and Vladimir Putin, one of the 2 or 3 most powerful men in the world, is utterly transfixed and compelled by this bar of gold. And it does have a hold over you. And there's a great story that Ruskin, who was an Old English critic actually, but writer, thinker, philosopher, and he told this story of a man on a ship going from one country to another, and the ship that hits a storm at sea and it starts to sink, and the cry goes out, Mayday, Mayday, abandon ship. And so the man grabs his bag of gold that he's taking with him to the new country and ties it round his waist and abandons ship and duly sinks to the bottom of the sea. And then the question asked was, had he the gold or had the gold him? And I think that perhaps describes exactly the problem you have. And you always have, throughout literature, there's this character, the miser, who's counting his money and holding his money and can't let go of his money. And Warren Buffett, Warren Buffett's dad, Howard Buffett, was a big, big gold bug. And he was around in the 90s, and he was a big campaigner for sound money when the American government confiscated American citizens' gold and made it illegal for Americans to own gold. Howard Buffett was a big, this is bad. We're abandoning the gold standard. We need to go back to gold. It's honest money. That was the environment that Warren Buffett grew up in, and he hates gold. Warren Buffett famously said, I'm going to paraphrase his famous line, but he says, you spend a fortune paying somebody to dig it up in Africa or someplace, you bring it back home, you bury it in the ground and pay somebody else a fortune to stand around guarding it. It has no utility. Anyone from Mars would be scratching their head. Now, this takes us back to our earliest point about why buy gold. Warren Buffett likes buying companies which grow. He likes businesses that grow and pay dividends, and I keep using that word grow. Gold doesn't grow. It stays exactly the same, which that goes against everything Warren Buffett stands for as an investor. He might like gold because it's sound money. He might like it for that reason. But as an investment, he's like, what's the point? Doesn't change. Doesn't pay a dividend, doesn't pay a yield, don't get a coupon. I have to pay someone storage fees. A gold miner, okay, I get that. I might invest in a gold miner because it's going to grow. But actual gold, he doesn't like it. So, and there's this contradiction. Gold has no utility, as Warren Buffett says. Like maybe 6% of annual gold demand is in industry, excluding jewelry, of course, but things like dentistry and electronics and actually spacecraft use quite a bit of gold. To all intents and purposes, gold has no use. Yes, you could use gold as a hammer, but steel makes a better hammer, and you could use gold as a knife and fork, but there are other metals that give you knives and forks much cheaper. So to all intents and purposes, given how expensive it is, gold has no utility. So what's the point? There's literally no point to gold, except it's the first metal human beings ever used. And it's useless. We used it long before copper or silver or iron or tin or any other metal. And what did we use it for? Jewelry. We wore it. So we wore it to display our wealth, our prowess, our power, and all of that. So it's useless and useful at the same time.
Right. And could it be the most emotional investment of all time?
Well, there's no doubt about that. I mean, because if you look at, for example, I don't know, copper or wheat or something, and you go, should I buy wheat? You start looking at farming inventories and wheat demand and all the rest of it. And similarly, copper, you'll look at Chinese demand and what's mining supply set to be this year and all these other things. Gold, all the gold that's ever been mined still exists. It's still there. And if you just cut off world gold supply tomorrow, it wouldn't make that much difference to the price. It would a bit because everyone would get all emotional about it. But actually, it wouldn't be that big a deal. And so it's driven more than any other investment, maybe Bitcoin a bit more, but it's driven by fear and greed. And it's driven by emotions rather than analytical logic, more than any other metal. And it's also a very political metal because of the fact that it was once money. There's, particularly on the sort of libertarian right of centre, they all think we should go back to sound money and gold is pure money, and the way that governments print money is bad. And the left doesn't like gold as much because they like state planning a bit more, and they think the government should be able to print money to regulate the economy and all of that. So it becomes a political metal. And so as soon as it's a political metal, it becomes an emotional metal because everyone gets so emotional about politics. And so, yeah, it's a highly emotional metal. And then, of course, it's wealth. It's beautiful. There's my little gold necklace I've got round my neck, and I can see you desiring it already, even across the airwaves.
It's faux.
No,
It's
it's
not
real. It's
real.
real. But it's like Frodo and the Precious. People want it.
Mm.
And so, yeah, it's a very emotional metal.
You talk about China in the book, and China is just this really contentious political country from America's perspective. But interestingly, many people probably don't know this, but China has been the world's biggest importer and producer of gold for many years, for decades. What do you think from China's perspective? Why be hoarding the gold? And what is going on there? What should we take from that?
Well, I think China's hoarding the gold for a bit the same reason as your Persian ancestors. Asians understand gold and desire gold in a way that Western Europeans don't seem to as much anymore. As you say, China's been the world's biggest gold producer. It overtook South Africa in 2007. It's been the world's biggest gold producer for 20 years. It's also the world's biggest importer, and it's been that since 2000. China obviously is the factory for the world. It manufactures most of the world's goods now, or certainly a large chunk of them. And what's it doing with all the surplus that it makes? Well, some of it is buying gold, because that's what people do. They don't know what else to do with the money, but they want to keep what the money they've got, so they buy gold. Chinese citizens have been encouraged to buy gold by their government since 2007. The government actually ran adverts telling people to buy gold. I mean, it's just absurd. Can you imagine the American government running adverts telling you to buy gold? It's just completely outside of our ken. And the Chinese government has been accumulating extraordinary amounts, and we don't know exactly how much gold has made its way to China, because the gold that goes through Dubai, Switzerland and London, which are the world's three biggest gold markets, is private. We don't know what private transactions are. And for example, the People's Bank of China buys 400-ounce bars. Now, 400-ounce bars don't go through the Shanghai Gold Exchange because the Shanghai Gold Exchange only deals in kilo bars. So they go straight to the People's Bank of China. But we do know that something like 30,000 tons of gold has gone through the Shanghai Gold Exchange since 2007. 30,000 tons, remember that figure. And we also know that China's mined 8,000 tons, and we also know that there were 4,000 tons in China in the year 2000. So something like, now some of that...
Something's going on. What are they building?
Well, exactly. Something is going on. And, some of that gold that's gone through the Shanghai Gold Exchange might have been double counted because it's gone through more than once, but only a small amount, because people, once they buy gold, they tend to hoard it and not sell it. So we know that 35,000 tons of gold has made its way to China. Now, America, the American government, has 8,000 tons, and that is all of America's foreign exchange reserves, or like 70-80% of them, held in gold. 8,000 tons. We know that more than 30,000 tons has gone through China. Now, of that gold that's gone to China, it's probably more like 40,000 tons. How much has the state bought, and how much has gone to private citizens? Now, when I talk to gold analysts, they all go 50%. State-owned. All China, more than 50% of Chinese mining is state-owned. Bear in mind also, China does not export gold. It's not allowed to. So all the gold that goes to China stays in China. And so if it's 50% of 30,000, it means that China's got, 15,000 tons of gold, state-owned, at least, twice as much as America. It says it has 2,000 tons. It's dramatically understated the gold that it has. It also has $3 trillion US. Now, why would China understate the gold it has? Because it doesn't want to rock the boat. It doesn't want to upset the markets. It doesn't want the US dollar to lose its value because China's got 3 trillion US dollars. It wants to buy stuff with them. We must not shine too brightly is the Chinese motto. China's doing very well at the moment, keeps making stuff, selling it, making a profit. Why rock the boat? Just keep on accumulating gold. But eventually, we know that China's very, very ambitious, and it wants to be the most economically powerful country in the world. It wants to have the strongest military in the world. And part of all these things is having the gold. He who has the gold makes the rules. When America was far and away top dog in, say, World War II, it had all the gold. When Rome was top dog, it had all the gold. When Alexander the Great was top dog, he had all the gold. And by the way, when he conquered Persia, what he would do, he would go to all the Persian mints, confiscate the gold supply, melt it down. It would have had Persian gods on it. He melted it down and restamped it with Greek gods. So Persians literally had their own history and legend struck off when they were conquered. So yeah, he who has the gold makes the rules. And so what is China doing? It's just building its wealth. It's building its power. And it's just keeping its head down and just going on accumulating. And if China and the US ever get into some kind of conflict, China can quite easily turn around and say, oh, actually, we've got 5 times as much gold as we said we had. And by the way, we don't think the US, you've got the gold you said you had because you haven't audited it since the 90s. China's got that card to play if ever it wants to. I'm not saying it will play that card, but it has that card.
Dominic, in a post-apocalyptic world, we could go back to a gold-backed monetary system. And in that world, we know
exactly.
who's going to, be leading.
It would be there would have to have been a very big financial crisis for that to happen.
Yes.
And money would have had to have lost its value almost altogether. And if that were to happen, you would see gold prices dramatically revalued upwards. And you'd probably see some kind of, what do they call it? You'd be taxed on the capital increase. Even though you hadn't sold your gold, there'd be some kind of, unearned wealth tax to pay.
Oh my gosh. Well, fast forward to Bitcoin, because some people see Bitcoin as like digital gold. And I'm wondering, maybe it's more a conversation from your Substack, but what do you think of that comparison?
Well, he designed it. Satoshi Nakamoto designed it to be to replicate many of the qualities that gold has, only digitally. And I think, a lot of Bitcoin bugs don't like gold and a lot of gold bugs don't like Bitcoin. And I just think one of them's a physical asset and one of them's a digital asset. And if you don't like digital assets, fine. If you don't like physical assets, fine. It tends to be generational. Older folk like physical assets, younger folk like digital assets. It's fine. But as long as you appreciate one is digital, one is physical, then you can see that they have different roles. There are many beauties to Bitcoin. Its portability, the fact that you can send billions of dollars worth of money instantaneously anywhere in the world without having to ask anyone's permission, or you can send 1/10 of 1 cent without having to, you can send tiny amounts of money as well. And the implications of permissionless money, and it's got this incredible computer system backing it all up and this incredible computer power. I think Bitcoin's wonderful and I think everyone should own it. But I understand some people don't understand it, don't want to understand it, don't like it. Fine. Nobody's forcing you to buy it. If you don't like it, you don't like it. My view is that by choosing not to understand it or learn about it, you're making a mistake. That's just one blogger's view. You make your own choices. But and I think Bitcoin will have a important role to play in the money systems of the future, largely because of this fact that it is permissionless in a way that no other currency is. Gold has always had. Today, central banks are buying more gold than they've bought since the late 1960s, and gold has no official role at all. Well, if gold's not official money, why are they buying it then? They're central banks. But they do.
What do you think? What do you think, actually?
It's a tacit admission that gold has a role as a reserve asset. It's not even tacit. It's an admission without, I suppose it is tacit because they're not saying gold has a role, but, actions speak louder than words. And this process of central bank buying is accelerated after the US Biden administration froze Russian US dollar assets after it invaded Ukraine. And a lot of countries looked at that and go, well, if America has the power to freeze our assets, we need to go into an asset that America can't freeze. And so there was a rush to buy gold. So that's what triggered that. And, the bull market in gold has quickly followed. And, America, there's this thing called Triffin's dilemma. Are you familiar with Triffin's dilemma?
I'm not.
Okay. So the Triffin's dilemma is the idea that whoever has the reserve currency of the world is inevitably going to, if you have the world's reserve currency and you have the power to issue money, you are inevitably going to run a deficit with the rest of the world. Because the rest of the world has to build factories and so on to make your money, and you can just print it and issue it. And so this leads to the inevitable outsourcing of industry from the US to the rest of the world. And this is what's happened. Meanwhile, it leads to the financialization of the US, which is also what's happened. The financial side of the US economy has grown tremendously since 1971, whereas manufacturing, broadly speaking, has declined. And if America wants to reshore its industry, and Trump has said that they do, and Vance has said that they do, and Bessent has said that they do, and they want to get the Rust Belt working again, and they want to get manufacturing back in the US and the Rust Belt and all of that. And they want to do this not just to revitalize the Rust Belt and revitalize US industry. They need to do it for important strategic reasons, because they can't have China making its chips if it's about to go into some kind of arms race with China. You can't have China making your weapons if you're about to go into war with China. It's just insane.
Right.
So
Right.
it's just, and this was all exposed during COVID and the vulnerability to last minute supply chains and rare earth metals and all the things Donald Trump talks about. So if America wants to do the things that they said they do, they need to get industry back in the US, manufacturing back in the US. And to do that, they're going to have to sacrifice a little bit of the US dollar's reserve status. And that doesn't mean that now the yuan or the ruble or something is going to become the reserve asset. Everyone can agree that gold is a good reserve asset because it's neutral. And what's more, China's got lots of gold, so it's happy. America's got lots of gold, so it's happy. So we're seeing a sort of tacit ceding of reserve currency status to gold by the US administration. And they're not going to outspokenly say that, but they've sort of tacitly said it a few times, and they've referenced Triffin's dilemma. This, by the way, there's an analyst called Luke Groman who sort of articulates this better than anyone, and this process that's going on. And so that's kind of what I think is happening. And so that's why I say gold may not be officially money, but it is going to have a role to play as a global reserve asset. I don't necessarily think that means, we're going to use gold coins again, because we don't use coins anymore. Money's digital.
Right.
And I suppose they could build a payment system on top of gold reserves, but it still involves third parties and promises and things. And the whole point of gold is it's nobody else's promise. It's just money in and of itself. But as a reserve asset, I'm sure it's going to have an increasingly important role to play. And at the moment, I think it's like 30% of central bank reserves, give or take, are in gold, and about 50% US dollar. And, that was a lot lower 5 years. In 2015, gold was, I think, 12%. So it's gone from 12 to 30%. Some of that has simply been the increase in the gold price, but a lot of it has actually been actual buying by central banks. If we're having this conversation again in 10 years, I bet you gold is higher than the US dollar.
Wow. Okay. So given that, for our listeners who want to develop a stake in gold, there's a lot of ways to do it, right? You could go to Costco and buy a gold bar. You could buy an ETF that tracks the gold market. You could buy gold jewelry. What do you see as sort of the most investor savvy way to include some gold in your portfolio? What's the best way to do that?
Well, I think gold rose maybe 65% last year. It was a good year.
Yeah.
So it beat everything pretty comfortably last year, including Bitcoin. That won't be the case every year. If you sign up to my Substack, The Flying Frisbee, theflyingfrisbee.com, one of the rewards you get for signing up, and it's free, by the way, is my report on how to buy gold. So it will answer all those questions. But yeah, I'm a big believer in owning physical jewelry. It's nice wearing jewelry, having little gold bars and gold coins, and as long as you've got somewhere safe to keep them, I'm a big believer in that as well. But make sure you don't go to a sort of scoundrel bullion dealer. It has to be a bullion dealer you trust. And if you're somebody that likes to own everything through your stockbroker, then buy one of the ETFs. That's a way of doing it. And if you're speculative and you want to lose all your money but potentially make 5 or 10 times your money, then look at the gold miners. But I wouldn't be in a hurry to look at those.
Yeah, and I always am curious, those who buy the gold bars, for example, what is the resale market? Where are you dropping this off to get the value back, or,
It's
the
very
appreciation?
liquid. It's very liquid. There'll always
Is
be,
it?
and there'll always be a market for gold. I think gold futures, they're the second most traded future in the world, and it's only either the US dollar or the S&P that trades more. Gold futures are highly liquid. That's paper gold. Like, you could go into any culture at any point in history, anywhere in the world, and they would understand that gold has value. It really is universal money. And if you buy, let's say you buy a 1 ounce Krugerrand or a US Eagle, are the big selling ones in the States, you'll never not be able to sell that. You could You could be in the depths of the 2008 financial crisis, you'd still be able to sell it. You might not be able to get the highest price for it if everyone's panicking, but you'll never not be able to sell it. It's a highly
Uh,
liquid market. You could go, if you're simply talking about one gold coin, you just go into a gold dealer or you sell it on eBay if you're feeling
eBay.
that way inclined, You'll never not be able to sell it. But hopefully you won't ever have to sell it or ever want to sell it because you'll turn out like your mum and you'll just want to hoard it.
And then it'll be mine maybe one day, and I'll drive by a place that says, "Sell gold here," and I might park. I might make a U-turn. Dominic Frisby, thank you so much. Your book is called The Secret History of Gold: Myth, Money, Politics, and Power, and your Substack, Flying Frisbee, you said?
The flying frisbee, yeah.
The Flying Frisbee. I'm gonna link all of that in our show notes. Thank you so much. This has been a really fascinating conversation. I've learned a lot.
Oh, thank you, Farnoosh. Thank you for having me, and good luck with your endeavors.